application security. So we'll try to have some understanding on to the practical approach on what kind of attacks usually we come across. Among them, the OWASP top 10 vulnerabilities, or I should say OWASP top 10 attacks, we will try to understand how the attack is performed, what are the mitigations for that, and how do we protect our applications from these OWASP top 10 vulnerabilities. So in case you have any doubts in between, you may please feel free to put up in the chat box. So the agenda for this particular session is something like this. We'll try to have a short introduction onto the concept, some concepts related to web applications, because I'm not sure about the target audience. So to just have a revision also, if whoever is there with the same background, it could help you for the revision. So we'll have understanding on the web concepts. Then we'll try to understand how the information gets revealed from the web applications, which are actually helping the attackers to gain some knowledge on the websites, and which in turn helps them to perform actual attacks in the later days. And then we'll try to understand the OWASP top 10, all the 10 attacks in detail with the demonstrations. So as we are talking the web applications and so on, so basically, as you all know, web is nothing but it's a world wide web where we have lot of applications, lot of services. And today, not only web-based applications, we have a lot of IoT devices, lot of mobile apps which are actually communicating with the internet. So the web includes now today not only the browser-based thing, mobile solutions, IoT solutions, and so on. So everywhere there is a possibility of an attack. However, how these attacks perform, if you get to know about the basic how it happens, usually we can try to protect all of these applications. So usually at home, when we are using our computers, we try to protect the web-based attacks. Precautions like using a best firewall in the systems, having it turned on always. We put up antivirus, we put anti-keyloggers kind of things. And at the organizations, obviously we use our firewalls. We set up a lot of intrusion detection systems, and we try to ensure that all our servers are hosted in the DMZ environment. So DMZ is nothing but the demilitarized zone. So that is a zone, it is a secured zone where we usually have to host our servers, which is in a protected way, so that none of the attacks can be successful on the applications. So this is a general way how we try to follow the precautionary measures. However, as I was mentioning the DMZ, in this picture you can see the right side, the orange circles, whatever I'm trying to represent is the DMZ environment of your servers in your organization. So you can consider them to be a data center. You can consider them to be a normal server which is hosted with a firewall and IDS, IPS at all been placed and is protected with them. So they are all in secured. And the applications hosted on these servers are being accessed by various people from different domains. They can be the computers, they can be mobiles or anything. So there is a lot of communication going on. And yes, all of this communication happens through the internet. So when this communication is happening through internet, there is lot of information that flows from the end user's PC to the DMZ. So users send user credentials, they try to access the application, they try to access different data. If it is a banking website, they perform a lot of transactions. So in this way, when they do all of these critical activities on their computers, there is a lot of information that flows through this internet world. People on watching this data. However, you all might be already knowing we protect our information from the visibility of these people by using a HTTPS. That is the SSL security. We try to use SSL so that our information that is flowing from my system to the target servers is flowing in a secured way. But though we use a HTTPS, attacker can also act as one of the user. One among these 6 species, what you see in the left, one of them can be an attacker species who can also try to behave as a genuine user and try to access your systems, through which also they try to understand a lot of information about the applications. So we need to be very clear on what information is flowing with respect to my server when I'm hosting a particular application in my organizations. So general myths for any network administrator you say, or a developer you say, generally what people think is, when I'm running my website on port 80, it is secured. We also think that if I'm using a HTTPS based website, it is secured environment so that no data sniffing and no man-in-the-middle attacks happen. As well, we also consider that if the firewalls are there, they are trying to protect me. I don't need to worry about my applications. And yes, there is an IDS which in case something happens, it immediately detects the attack and tries to raise an alarm so that the network administrator or the concerned member can take a necessary action. And nowadays we also use IPS. It's not only detection, we also want to prevent. So people also started putting IPS so that if attack happens, if it doesn't, it won't be successful enough. Putting all of these things together, we conclude that I am hosting an application in a safe environment and I am safe. That's what we conclude. However, all of these myths that we are trying to think are secured enough are not sufficient today. And that's the reason we see many attacks that are happening regularly, and we see lot of news coming out, so and so data has been leaked out, so and so website has been hacked, and so on. The main reason is, as we are talking, though I'm hosting my application on 80 and 443, there are specially crafted attacks designed to perform on port 80 based applications or 443 based. Like, as you can see some names here, SQL injections, parameter tampering, cross-site scripting attack. There are many more: insecure deserialization, session mismanagement, authentication bypass. All of these attacks are purely targeted to perform on the HTTP or HTTPS based applications. The firewall which we are considering it will secure me, what firewall is doing is it is trying to look into the ports that I need to allow, and it will allow. It doesn't know what is going through. It doesn't know what to act on that particular data. So since we are stopping other ports, the other attacks, what you see in the bottom left of orange box, brute force, RPC, buffer overflow, null session, which are all targeting towards the different ports of the, it can be of the router ports, it can be of the server ports, but they are not targeted to this port. So the firewall is stopping it because that port is not allowed. But since we are allowing 80 port, because we need to allow it. If we don't allow, obviously our application is not accessible to the public. So we'll allow it. However, these attacks target the application through this particular port only. And the point to be noticed here is these attacks are not only attacking your application, but they are also attacking your web server. They are also targeting or are reachable to your operating system, and in turn they are also reaching your database. So through a web-based attack, one can create a system level user in the operating system. So you must be thinking, I'm hosting a website. If an attack happens, either my website should go down or my website data should be leaked. But there are attacks through which, without touching your website, I can create a hidden administrator in your operating system. If it is a Windows server, I can create an admin in a Windows server. So the web-based attacks are not only attacking your websites. They are so much sophisticated that they can reach your web servers, they can reach your operating system, different services they can touch upon, and then they can even touch upon the database, which might be hosted on the same server or on a different server. So it is very, very important. I'm just trying to ensure that we have to understand that the web attacks, though we have put all of these security measures, whatever I listed in my previous slide, are there, still the attacks are possible. So it is important for us to understand these concepts. So yes, moving towards like what is, we were just initially discussing about the request goes and the response comes in. There is a lot of data flowing through. What flows through there? So when a request is going, this is HTTP is usually also called as the request response protocol, because for every communication that is initiated from the client, so in this entire session, we will be talking to two names, client and server. So the client is always your browser I'm referring to, because all our HTTP requests that we try to send is we are considering to be through the browser. So the browser is the client here, and the server is nothing but any of the website I try to type in the browser. That server which is hosting this website can be referred to as a server. So HTTP is a client server communication. So this is called as a request response protocol. So HTTP is a simple structure where client sends a request and server generally responds back. And this is a stateless protocol. That means HTTP protocol itself cannot maintain any state. That is the reason developers try to put their efforts in creating session IDs. They try to ensure that one user session is maintained properly, appropriately in the application without prompting them to every time log in into the systems. And today you also see, if you are logged into your Google or Facebook account on your regularly using laptops and mobiles, you never been logged out. Most of you might have even forgot your passwords because you might be using your systems, your laptops and your computers and mobiles. So all of this is happening because of the programmers who are trying to maintain your session on the systems. But HTTP protocol itself doesn't have the capability to maintain your states. However, when the people are struggling to put sessions and maintain your sessions, there are a lot of hiccups over there also, and there are attacks pertaining to those sessions as well. So everything that we talk in web, every activity has an attack perspective to that, attack angle to that, and then definitely there is a chance for us to secure that and put best efforts to protect those concepts so that the attack doesn't happen related to the attacks. Like say, for example, if it is input validation attacks, input validation should be done so that a malicious input doesn't come. If we are talking about session management, best session management should be done. Otherwise, session-based attacks could be possible. So whichever concept you think in HTTP, everywhere we need to implement the best programming so that, or secure programming so that the application will be secured enough. So just to give you an overview, basically I would not go into through all of these. I understand that when a request is sent and a response is coming back, let me show you. For example, I just go to this browser. So this is one simple application. Let me go to Facebook first. Say, for example, you type in your browser. Now we are talking about a client and server, right? So this is my browser, is my client here. I have typed in facebook.com. So I am trying to initiate a request from my browser to Facebook server. So as we discussed, there is a lot of information that goes between when we communicate this. So when I type in facebook.com and press enter, in a fraction of some seconds, the page be loaded, right? Now, for example, when is happening, similarly, even if you type in any website, any news website, India Times, or anything, whenever you type in, you don't see anything. In some fraction of minutes, you observe that the website gets loaded over here. However, what we need to notice is when anything we are typing, if you press a function, F12 function key, for example, it's more convenient if you use it in your Firefox browsers also. One second. Just changing my browser so that we see a proper session over here. Yeah, I'm going to the Firefox browser, and in this browser, just forget about what I did now. Okay, Facebook. Yeah, so facebook.com, definitely we see this kind of a login page. Now, if I press a function key F12 in my system, it can be in our system or laptop, you see this kind of a window that comes in over here. So there is a tab inspector which generally developers use, and there are many more tabs. Let us click on the network tab. When you click on network and then refresh this particular page, then what happens? The page gets loaded. At that particular time, whichever request has been initiated by this client, that is by this browser to the server, all of those requests we can see over here. So if I type in my username and password or something, I'm just typed in username password. Here you can see as of now there are 5 requests. I click on login. I get one more over here that has been lost. So the request, whatever we send, everything gets visible over here, and each of this click in, you can see much more details flowing through that request over here. See, as you can see here, I was referring to request and response, right? So when a browser is initiating a communication, generally, that actually sends a request header. Say, now for example, when I have typed in, whatever you see over here, the blue highlight what I'm doing, This is called as the request header, where the very first line refers to the method. So by default, usually you see a get method kind of a thing. Get, there is some path of a particular file is being going, and then followed by HTTP protocol. Along with this, you see a lot of information about which host I'm communicating, what user agent I'm using, what is my referrer. The referrer is again one more important HTTP header which is used by most of the statistics. Say for example, as of now, you see when I'm accessing facebook.com for the first time, I can see uh, all the internal pages I'm accessing, I can see like this. If I type Google first, okay, and then if I'm from google.com, if I'm going to Facebook, it means I am trying to access Facebook by accessing Google through Google. The Facebook page is referred by Google. Oops, my word is wrong. So if you see, when I see this get request, this is the get request, right? So I'll just show you the raw type. Now you see here the get slash is the landing page, HTTP 2 version it's been using, and post facebook.com. So on facebook.com, with the browser initiating a request for the home page, all of these headers going from my client to the server. So over here you can see user agent. My browser is accepting which types of content, HTML, XML, all of these. I'm using which language. I can see here what kind of encoding is about my browser. And then you see the referrer google.com. This is because from Google I have accessed Facebook. So referrer is google.com. In this way, usually all of these sites try to manage the statistics. How many people have directly accessed my website? How many have come through any other search engines? Like that, people try to get the statistics onto particular website. Similarly, there are some more headers like cookies, connection, and so on. When this request is sent from browser, the server gives you a beautiful page like this, what you are seeing over here. But along with this, there are few headers also over here. As you see here, I showed you request. Similarly, this is the response header. I just show you the raw format. And this is called as the response. Where along with your HTML body, there is some information about the server that we can see over here. It has accepted our request, so it is 200 OK. And there are some headers. These are all security headers usually been set to secure the server basically. So this is how the request and response flows across between the client to the server. And you can see them on your browsers directly. So what we were trying to explain over here is when a request and a response is coming from server usually uses some codes like this 100, 200 series, 300 series. Usually whenever you might have seen many a times 404 file not found and all. That is called as the basically since it is 400 series, it is called as client error. Similarly, there are other errors also which are usually 300 and 500. People who are interested in ethical hacking or auditing or testing, for them these header codes are usually useful. However, based on this, the next target attack will be planned usually. So this is the same one of the sample of how the request header looks like. Whatever I have shown you in browser just now, a glimpse of it. When a user is accessing elearn.cdekhod.in, its home page, all of these HTTP headers goes through from the client to the server. That is called as the request header. When this request is sent, server gives a response back with so many more headers being set, which will have information about the server. Sometimes you will also see the version of the Apache web server and all of these informations. So that is how the request and response. So from this information, people try to understand which version they are using, what kind of environment they are using, and they try to perform the attacks on the system. So for example, I've just hosted some test applications on my localhost environment. So when I type in this, you can see that this is my server response. And here you can see my server is Apache Coyote 1.1 version. So it gives me a hint that, okay, this server is using a Tomcat version. Similarly, if I go application over here, a damn vulnerable application, here also if I try to look into the headers, you could probably see what kind of, oops, you can probably my response header, see server's response. Here you can see Apache, they are using 2.4.46 and it is a Win64 using PHP 7.3.21. So this is what is the information about the server. Now from this information, people can try to target upon, they may look in the internet what attacks are there related to Apache 2.4.46 version, and those attacks they may try on the system. If there are any attacks or CVEs recorded for PHP 7.3.21, they may try this. In this way, by looking into the headers, people can get information, unnecessary information to the which can help the attackers to plan or target their attacks related to versions, related to, there are many more things that can be done usually, but this is one of them. So by seeing into the headers, response headers, so how much information is getting revealed from your web server is what we have to look into. We have to reduce as much as information possible. Even sometimes we can remove all of these headers also. That is also possible. So in that way, we need to understand how much information is getting exchanged between the client and the server. So, okay, I just put a small question over here. So sensitive information about a server or a website can be visible in which? Just now that we have covered this concept anyway. So I am talking about a sensitive information about a server or a website can be visible in which? A request header or a 300, 400 responses or all of the above. You may put your answers in the chat box. Anybody? The question is sensitive information about a server can be visible in which? We just now saw some server headers, right? HTTP request headers are there, response headers are there. So in which headers do we see sensitive information about a server? Is what is the question. Any answers? I hope I'm audible. I don't see any communication. So Atul, can you acknowledge me? Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am, you are audible.
Okay. So the answer for this is the response header, because we are talking about the sensitive information that has been revealed from the server, about a server. So from server, whatever headers we see are usually the response headers. So response headers usually have information about the servers, and request header you have the information about the client. That's how you can analyze what data is flowing through and how much of the server's information is getting revealed through the headers. And this same information you can also see through different tools like browser debuggers are there, proxies are there, capture debugger is something what we have just now seen from your Firefox browser or a Chrome browser. If you press a function F12 key, it will automatically show you this particular plugin window wherein you can analyze the complete request headers and response headers on the network tab and understand the information that is being flown from your server to the clients. The same information is seen through the proxies. This is called as a proxy tool. So what I'm showing you is a burp suite. Similarly, there are many more proxies like Paras proxy is there, OWASP Zap proxy is there. So all of those proxies also can intercept the request and can see show you the request over here like this. Similarly, even you can see the response headers and try to perform any kind of interception over here and perform the verification on the servers. Apart from these two, you might have already been seen a Wireshark tool earlier. So the same Wireshark tool can also be utilized for verifying the HTTP request and response headers, the complete HTTP communication. If at all, if it is HTTPS, yes, we cannot see that in plain text in the Wireshark. But if it is HTTPS also, you can see the same in plain text in the proxy tool. The reason is the proxy is working at a different layer and the Wireshark is working on a different layer. So you may map over here. HTTPS works at a network layer. And so the network communication is all encrypted. Whereas the proxy tool, what we are trying to show over here, burp suite or WASP Zap I'm referring, they are all working at the application layer. And so you can even see the HTTPS communication in plain text in case of a burp proxy or something. So that it helps us to analyze what traffic is flowing and how much of information is getting revealed from the servers. So this is some basic introduction about your HTTP request and responses. However, If you would like to have much more information on all of these concepts of basics, this is a simple checklist which you can go through, look around in the internet for information. By understanding these concepts, you can become strong into basics to move further and understanding onto securing the applications. So before we move towards OWASP top 10, I just wanted to explain some notable breaches basically. These are a little older, but these are something which you may understand the impact of attacks. I'm trying to show you one among them, that is the Heartbleed. So I'm not sure how many of you heard about it, but around 4 years back, this Heartbleed attack has become so popular because this was something which affected majorly SBI initially. Later on, many other organizations got affected. This Heartbleed attack has created a sensation because though the websites were secured and by using HTTPS, everybody were using HTTPS, through this attack, people using HTTPS also, the attackers were able to see their credentials in plain text. That was what happened in the with respect to this particular Heartbleed attack. So it was a serious vulnerability, and that was due to the loophole that was there in the OpenSSL software, which is the most popular software used to implement the SSL and TLS on the web servers. So if you understand the attack, you will feel that such a simple law could OpenSSL miss. But that's how things happen. Vulnerabilities happen like that only. So as you can see here, this is how the Heartbleed attack can be demonstrated. You can see in the top, the normal usage, what is available over here. The client is sent, and the left side of blue is the client. The client is sending a request to server. We have just now had some good time in understanding request and response headers, because that is a very, very important concept to understand any web-based attack. That is the reason I have tried to put efforts into explaining you what is a request header and what is a response header. How do we see that? How do we analyze it? So client is sending a request to the server that server, send me this 4-letter word if you are there, bird. This is a simple English language I am trying to explain. So if this request has to be sent from client to server, no? In the HTTP request headers, you will see content length 4 and the word bird. So you give me a word bird if you have it with you, its content length is 4 is what client is asking. Then the server, when the client is sending request, server checks that, okay, he's asking for content length 4, the word bird, yes, bird is with me, and here is the 4-letter word. That's how the server responds back with the word bird. In case of Heartbleed vulnerability, what happened was the client was asking the same request, send me this word bird, but he's telling 500-letter word of bird. He's asking the word bird only, but the content length he's requesting for more than what is actually he need. So what the server have done, he has checked that it is having the word bird with it. And then since he asked me 500 letters, the server responded back with all the 500 letters after the word bird. Unfortunately, in the SSL communication, immediate after our credentials, we used to have the keys with it inside the SSL communication. So along with the credentials, it also gave me the key that is there in the server's communication. So in that way, the client have got the key. Once he get the key, he can easily decrypt the communication. He can easily see he sniff up the data and decrypt the content and see in the content very easily. That's how the Heartbleed vulnerability has happened, and attack was successful, and it has affected so many big companies where so many sensitive information got revealed out there. So it is very important that here the simple thing is the server might have verified word bird is asking me. So bird size is 4 length. I have to give him 4 length only. Why should I go with the size of the length that client is asking? Server should define, you ask me word bird, or yes, it is a 4-letter word, I will give you this. The length should be defined by the server. So that's how the attack happened. It's a simple scenario. In this way, there are numerous attacks in the web world which can create higher impact. Though we see them to be a smaller vulnerability, the impact is very, very high. So it's important for us to secure all of them. I hope you got an understanding on this Heartbleed vulnerability. So moving towards the OWASP top 10 vulnerabilities. Do you have any questions so far? We just covered the basics and we are moving towards the top 10 vulnerabilities where we'll be talking directly about the attack, how attack happens, and so on. If you have any questions, we can quickly take up. Okay, great. So no questions. No questions means either it could be that all of you are following me very well, or you're not able to follow me. Any of that it can be. So moving towards the OWASP top 10 vulnerabilities, let us understand the top 10 vulnerabilities of OWASP. So before we go, what is OWASP? How many of you heard the word OWASP? Are you aware of what is OWASP? Anybody? Okay. So OWASP is basically, it's an security community. In fact, it's not an organization. It is a community called as an Open Web Application Security Project. Though the OWASP name is having the word web, it is related to not only web-based, but it is also dealing with the mobile applications, the web services, and many more. So basically, it is a community who usually there are a lot of security domain people inside in that community. They do a lot of research in various security practices, security best practices. They develop a lot of security cheat sheets and so on, and they contribute a lot to the security world. So what they do is every year, every few years, they release a lot of checklist items. They have a vast manual, testing manual is there. They have checklists with them. OWASP defines the top 10 vulnerabilities. Basically, since I said there is a lot of people in security domain in the community, based on their experiences that they gather in the industry, they try to design the top 10 vulnerabilities that are there across in the world in the web environment. So that will try to help people to think that, okay, these vulnerabilities are the top 10 happening. So I need to secure my application among these. There are other vulnerabilities also which are affecting, but top 10 are termed to be the high, and most of the applications people usually call that you give me OWASP complaints. It means my website should not have the top 10 vulnerabilities. It doesn't mean others it can have, it should not have anything. If OWASP top 10 are not there, automatically the other smaller vulnerabilities also will be fixed. So this is an OWASP web application, open web application security project who releases top 10s, and most released top 10 vulnerabilities were in 2017. Previous to that was 2014. And first release happened in 2003. So based on those top 10, basically regularly they keep on updating their manuals, they keep on updating their checklists, cheat sheets. There are so many resources that are there with OWASP. If anybody is interested in the web application security, web application secure coding, secure testing or anything, yes, OWASP is a very good platform to start with. You can look into their manuals, their materials. They are very, very easily understandable. So we are trying to look into the top 10 vulnerabilities defined by OWASP in 2017. So the 2017 OWASP top 10 is like this. The top most vulnerabilities seen across in the world, in the worldwide web applications, is injection attack. So injection is something where malicious data gets injected. Now, what kind of data is injecting? Based on that, the type of injection gets decided. So injection can be SQL injection, HTML injection, OS injection, command injection. There are so many types of injections. So if I'm injecting a command, it becomes a command injection. If I'm injecting a HTML code into the application, it becomes an HTML injection. If I'm injecting an SQL query, it becomes SQL injection. So whatever it is, the top 10, in fact, this A1 injection seems to be in the top 1 position since the last 4 to 5 rounds of top 10 list I have seen. So most applications are seen to be that they are vulnerable to injections. So the programmers are trying to write code in such a way that the injections are successfully possible. That is what it means. The applications, whatever are there in the World Wide Web, they're having this injection attack to be most seen. The next stands the broken authentication. Next to that is sensitive data exposure, then the XML entity injections, broken access, and so on. As you can see, the top 10, we'll go through them one by one. This is just a comparison of the previous top 10, 2013 top 10 and 2017 top 10. As you see here, the A1 and 2 remain to be the same. without any change injection. In fact, before prior to 2013 also, injection was in the top 1 position. Later to that, you can see that there are some changes into vulnerabilities. Cross-site request forgery is now no more available in top 10. CSRF is what was there in 2013, but in 2017, CSRF vulnerability is not among the top 10 because now people are using very good programming framework itself is coming out with CSRF tokens. So programmers need not bother about the token implementations. That's how the CSRF attack vulnerability has gone away from the top 10 list. However, key thing to be noted over here is A10, insufficient logging and monitoring, and A8, insecure deserialization. These are the new vulnerabilities that came into 2017 top 10. And this is because the latest technologies that are being used, insecure deserialization is due to the latest technology, and insufficient logging is due to the, basically this is a practical problem. It is not a vulnerability in a way. Insufficient logging and monitoring is a practical problem that is being seen across in most organizations. As you see, there are so many news happening that so many attack happened, web data breach happened, data is being lost. But it happened to be very difficult to identify or analyze how attack happened because people were not having sufficient logs. People were not having logs to tell when, who, how, what data has been accessed. So that created an environment where happening an attack is one way means diagnosis of the attack is also very important. Only then we can take the next action of precautionary measures. If we do not know how the attack is happening, then how do we take a precautionary measure? And so the insufficient logging and monitoring has also taken place among the OWASP top 10, and that need to be also be taken care equally. And A4 is also a new one, XXE, which is also because of the reason of latest technology, people using Node.js, JSON kind of things and all. And there are many concepts nowadays communication happens through XML mode rather than a normal HTML communications. So this is how the OWASP top 10 is designed, and these are all been brought into this list by most security experts, and people are trying to make their websites in compliance to these top 10 vulnerabilities. So let us go towards each of these vulnerability. Injection. As I said, injection. It's about tricking an application into including unintended commands into the data sent to the interpreter. So an application is there which is actually intended to accept username. But if somebody is trying to enter a single quote or he is trying to enter a program over there instead of a username, the application should actually stop him. But it is not doing that. That's what is the today's current problem. Unfortunately, people think it is stopping because whenever you enter instead of a username, as soon as you enter a wrong value or by mistake you may enter a dot. For example, I enter Indraveni, k.indraveni. As soon as dot is observed, the application prompts me no dot is accepted in username field. Though we think that it is stopping me. But what's stopping me is my client-side program. There are two things. People are using HTML5 validations as well. People are using JavaScript validations. So these two are client-side programming. They are not sufficient to stop the attacks because I can easily bypass the client-side validation, and still though you say dot is not allowed, I interpret through proxies, I do some other interceptions and try to send the dot if I really want to send to your server. So injection is happening because of this problem only. Let us see a small demonstration of how injection happens. Okay, so this is a field, account name, and SKU. This is a small form you can see here. An attacker is sitting over here. He tries to send a request to the server. Server executes, sends that request at the server end, and the server responds back to the application user with the actual account data. However, you may, I think let's see this demonstration. So I'm just removing this inspector tab. So as you can see here, I have a simple application over here. This is an American Services application. So this has one page where I can see the list of some products, seasonal product, first product, second product. There's a search button over here. So for example, I one of the product name, click over here and say search. It searches and gives me the result. Similarly, if I enter something which is not there inside it, I search, I'm not getting any result. So this is a page which is trying to look for, taking input from user, searching it in the database and showing me back. Similarly, there is a login page over here. Seems to be there's a new password page and so on. as we are discussing about injection, injection is happens in two places. One is wherever a form field is available. This is called as a field, right? So wherever there is a field, there is a possibility of trying an injection on this. Apart from the form fields, there would be also pages where you see the fields in the URL. In the URL, you see question mark value, ampersand. So whenever those values are there, it means that URL is the parameters are sent through URL. Now in this application, what I do, for example, I log in as administrator. Okay, I've logged in as administrator. You can see its application is greeting me, hello administrator. There's a logout button, there is a home button, and there's an admin tab over here. Some pages are there for admin to access. Now I log out. I can also see that there's one more user in this. And for this user, there is some information here. Similarly, home is there, preferences, products is there. But you see here, there is no admin tab. So with this, we can differentiate that this application is having two roles. One is admin role, one is might be a normal user. So if an admin role based user logs in, he can have an admin link, extra link through which he can access admin related pages, and other users will have these links. That's what is the overview of the application. Now, what one can do for injection is, generally when anyone is using a username password over here, people try to, injection is something, as we discussed, application accepting unintended data into the field. Say I'm entering a single quote over here and say login. See, it has thrown me an error. If you can recollect, this is a 500 series error. It means internal server error. So whenever a 500 series error is shown, it is very, very, very sensitive, because most 500 series errors try to reveal server-side programming logics to the users. So as you see here, I can see some part of Java code over here, JSP code in fact, and it's trying to tell me that whatever I entered a single quote, it's trying to help me that single quote is an invalid value what you have tried. So it's showing me a query which is actually part of the program. So 500 series error was very dangerous because they show programming logics. Secondly, because of the single quote, I can see the query being visible over here. And so I can try out some more fields also into this. So instead of this, I try, for example, this is called as a magic quote in the SQL injection, single quote or 1 is equal to 1 semicolon double hyphen. And I press login. Did you notice, without entering a password and even without entering the right username, I am able to log in into the application. I can see the application without a credential. And in fact, I have become the administrator because I can see the admin link over here. What has happened just now? Can anyone imagine? So we try to enter a magic code. This is called as an SQL injection magic code. The only reason is magic code is this just tries to make the SQL query to be true. That's the reason it is a magic code. So when I'm entering this value in the name field without entering the right username, this is not the username in the correct password, but still the application is allowing me to log in into the system successfully. This is what is the trick behind the SQL injection. So SQL injection is something which it takes input from the user, manipulates the program's logic, and tries to give the result to the users. So what happened over here is something like this. Now in this slide you can see the generally the background, probably you'll be able to understand this. If not, I can even skip. If people are not interested, you can let me know. However, this is a general query where select star from user where login equals to star and password equal to KitKat. This is how we generally write a database query. Now, when you put this query into the code, into a program, can be a PHP program, a Java program, JSP program, don't go with the syntax, please understand the logic over here. So here what we are doing is, we are trying to put into a variable SQL, the query. And in the query, wherever the username and password should come, we are trying to put up a variable over here. So dollar is representing a variable in a PHP. I'm using $username and $pwd for these values. So whatever user enters at the field of username and password in that particular form, what we have seen now, that gets replaced over here in the program. So when we entered So in the $username, the value that is there is single quote or 1 equal to 1. So as you see here in the bottom line, red and blue combination, select star from user where login is equals to single quote. First single quote is part of the code. The next red color quote is what we entered just now in the form. This red content, single quote or 1 is equal to 1, semicolon, double hyphen is something which we have entered just now. Then followed by whatever is there in gray is part of the code again. Now what happened by this is, when this query is written changed like this, automatically login is equals to single quote, that is empty, or 1 is equal to 1. Obviously 1 equal to 1 is true. And so the query is becoming true over here. Followed by semicolon, semicolon is end of a query, and double hyphen is nothing but commenting the rest of the part. Generally, this logic of using double hyphen or hash depends on the database. So for a user to perform an attack, they should also understand which database they are using. People do hit and try. Mostly hardly double hyphen hash kind of comments are only there in the databases. So one of the other comment will definitely work for them if there is a problem. So with this logic, they are trying to comment the rest of the code. In this way, user's input is directly going into the database, into the applications program, through which it is also hitting the same query in the DB. With this logic, it is trying to show the entire user's output. The query is true, and so it has considered that this user is existing, and it has given him the access to the user. That is how the SQL injection usually happens. So the trick of inserting the SQL query into the application and showing the content back to the users is what is the logic over here with SQL injections. So is that clear how SQL injection happens? So how do we mitigate this? Similarly, HTML injection can also, any injection, the logic is same. When in case of SQL, we have to think and write a query to actually understand how the query should get executed on the program database. But in case of a HTML injection or script injection or anything, we need to write a HTML code so that it gets fed into the application and it gets reflected on the systems. So that's how the injection attacks happen. So the solution for this is, yes, we need to put proper validations in place, not client-side validations. We have to put server-side validations. We need to ensure that all the inputs that we are passing should go to the interpreters. And especially for SQL injections, along with the validations, it is also recommended to use prepared statements or stored procedures technique while writing the programs, which will try to create a pre-compiled query so that the SQL injection is not successful on the applications. Okay, so that's how the SQL injection happens, and the precautionary measures are: number one, validations. Proper strong validation should be done on every input field that is being taken, and that too at the server side. And use prepared statements so that the pre-compiled queries can be formed. So since you have seen a demonstration of an SQL injection, can we have a short question? So the way the SQL injection had happened just now, we have tried to input some values in the form, and the application is processed and shown me the SQL based output. Either error messages are shown or it allowed me to log into the system. So whether these kind of injection attacks can be protected if we use a HTTPS or an SSL? Yes or no? If yes, can you please tell what could be the reason? If no, what could be the reason? Just a 2 minutes question for us. Yeah, no. No means for what? Yes, yay. Okay. Any more answers? Few people said yes, few people said no. Any more? The question is whether the SQL injection attack, whatever we have seen just now, can such attacks perform on a website? Can such attacks be performed on websites which use HTTPS or SSL? Okay, good. I can see few answers. Say yes, few said no. The answer is both C and D. First, let us discuss. Yes, as they encrypt the data. Yes, as it secured with certificates. So basically, yes is not possible because as you can see, SSL is using a job of encrypting the data and securing with certificate. So in terms of SSL, these two are correct. SSL is encrypting the data, SSL is securing with certificates. But encryption doesn't do validation. Our main key thing to protect SQL injections or any kind of injection attacks is validation. SSL doesn't do a validation. And so its job is only to perform encryption. Its job is only to do the verification with respect to certificates, secured with certificate or not. So the answer is no. The SSL cannot protect the injection attacks because it only performs encryption and it cannot validate the data. So if we have thinking, if we are having some website which is on HTTPS, we should not think that HTTPS will protect my application from SQL injection or any kind of attacks. Definitely not. Application level security and validations are most important to stop injection attacks. If you buy HTTPS, the strongest certificate from a big vendor also, it wouldn't be sufficient because it's not the job of SSL. Validation is not the job of SSL. SSL's job is only for encryption. And encryption is not the solution for injection attacks. Right? Great. Thank you so much for putting up your answers. So I hope you got a glimpse onto why we are saying no. If still you have any question, you can definitely put, we can definitely discuss upon that point if at all you require. So moving towards the next OWASP top 10. The next OWASP top 10 A2 is broken authentication. So the best practice to protect is basically to implement validation on each and every user input field that is coming from the application. That too, whitelisting based protection has to be implemented. Say for example, I'll just open up a small notepad and explain one concept. Okay. So I was just talking about validation, right? So I'll just give you one small logic of validation so that you can easily consider it. Say for example, you are having a username value, username name field. Okay, name field is there where you wanted to accept to name something like this. So usually all names usually have only alphabets and the spaces. What most of the people do is they try to put a condition like this. If name is having is equals to is having just mean to be is equal to be is having name is having any of these values. If name is having any of this and so on, there will be many more. All of the special characters that are there on my keyboard, I will type in over there and say if name is having any of these things, stop, else allow. Most programmers try to put up this kind of a logic. If my name is having any of this, then I'll stop him. If it doesn't have any of this, then I consider that okay, it will be having only this. This is called as blacklisting validation. This is called as a blacklisting validation. The reason is we are trying to create a list of black items, blacklisted items, the items which are not required for my field. In this way, my list will be very huge. Instead, if I go for a methodology called as whitelisting validation. If I go for whitelisting validation, what does this mean is let's take the same example of name. I think I'll open one more. Okay. Oh, it doesn't come. Sorry. Okay, I'll take the same example over here, name equal delivery. So if for in this case, what I will do is if name is having A to Z, capital A to Z and a space, then what I would say is then allow, else stop. This is called as a whitelisting error. Now you can decide upon which is the best way. Over here we are trying to put a big list of items which are not required for me and then telling if any of this is coming into my system then stop, otherwise you allow only this. Or you will say this is what is required. If what is required is coming, then only you allow him. Anything error apart from this comes, just stop him. So this is called as a whitelisting validation. So which is the best way among these two? Can someone tell, whitelisting or blacklisting? I have given a clear example of how whitelisting validations are done and how blacklisted validations are done. So which is the best way now? Good to see many people are telling whitelisting. Yes, exactly. The whitelisting is the best way because in case of blacklisting, you will never know what will be the new array, what will be the new special character. You may be stopping this and this, but I may come out tomorrow with this. Rupee symbol is something again newly has come. With that also some vulnerabilities have come out. Tomorrow some other special character comes in. You have to every time go back and keep changing your code. And you never know what are the things which you don't need. There may be combinations, there may be so many Unicode formats, there are different types. So guessing on what we don't know is very difficult. Imagine your home, in your house, you know your family members. You will allow only your family members and rest all you will not allow. That logic, if you put at your gate, it's easier for some gate person to stop them. If you give the gate person the photographs of all the people who should not be allowed to your home, it's very difficult for the gate person to identify, right? To find out who is not, and you don't know who bonds tomorrow. So this is the same logic applies over here. So yes, whitelisting is the best way because this is always the list which we know what I want. And you can simply tell the logic to the people. So you enter only alphabets. With that, automatically your solution to the users is easier. As well, you can also control your application very well. So to stop injection attacks, validation is most important. Preferably, whitelisting validation is easier and safe to stop any kind of attacks, injection attacks. So I hope it answers your question. So moving towards broken authentication. So broken authentication is related to the session management, in fact. So it is something, as we discussed earlier, HTTP is a stateless protocol. So it doesn't maintain sessions. So it is a headache of the developers to actually maintain the sessions. So one has to take care, ensure safely that the sessions are managed properly. If the session is sent as part of the URL, that is one of the biggest flaw. Session should never be part of the URL because from URL, logs and all have this data that from the URL. So it can be easily be triggered. Similarly, sessions should always be mapped with the path of application, which folder it is been assigned to. Admin folder should have a different session ID. Some other folders based on application session ID should be binded. So like this, session management has a very important aspect. So this is one example of in PHP how session management has to be done, the good way and the bad way. As you see here, it's been demonstrated that when a user logs in, you are verifying that user. For example, maybe this slide you can refer later also. So as we have seen, this is an administrator page and we saw that this is a page which is allowed for administrator. So what I will do, I'm just selecting the URL and copying. Okay, admin.jsp is the page. I log out and I log in as a normal user here. When I log in as a normal user, what happens is I can see that there is no admin link over here. So it means this user is actually not allowed to access the admin page. But I will try to paste this admin URL over here. See, though I'm not allowed to access that page, I'm able to access the content of it by accessing the URL directly. This is one of the example of session mismanagement. What is happening over here? Is checking whether the user is logged in or not, but it is not checking whether the page is actually allowed to him or not. That is the same logic I have shown here in the slide over here. This is with a simple PHP example. The best way is in an administrator page, the green box, what is there in the right. In an admin page, one has to see whether the role is admin or not. Sorry, one has to see whether the session is user or not. Once the session is existing, then you have to verify whether that user is an admin or not. Then only give him the admin page. Otherwise, the simple logic, we should not consider the logged in user will behave as per his role. After the user logs in, he can do many activities. He can change URL, he can change the parameters that are there in the URLs and many activities. So each and every page, each and every activity, we need to verify whether the user is allowed to show this page or not. That is only the best way to session management. If not, session related, so many attacks are there: session hijacking, session fixation, and so on. So since the time is moving, I'm just not showing this, but definitely by seeing the slide, you will be able to understand what session based attacks happen through. If not, you can reach me anytime. We can, through email or through groups, we can definitely discuss. So moving towards the other ROAS top 10 is sensitive data exposure. This is related to the sensitive data. As we have seen one example where error pages were revealing sensitive information about the programming language and database. Similarly, there are many more sensitive informations related to the application: tokens, passwords, banking informations, locations. If your application is dealing with any of the sensitive data about a particular user, it's very important on how that data is being stored, logged, cached, and transmitted. We have to take care about the data at rest, data at transit, and data in, what are the three? Data at rest, transit, data rest and data transit. We have to take care about how the data is secured in both of these cases. So in logs, in cachings, and all, how it is secured. While transmitting, are you sending in plain text or not? It has to be taken care that sensitive information, though you have HTTPS, we have to try to put an extra layer of either doing an encoding or encryption on the data and then transmit over SSL, because we can't guarantee that SSL gives us 100% security. Anytime SSL can be downgraded. The one example what we have seen already, Heartbleed, that's one of the vulnerability which proves that SSL based attacks are also possible very easily. So if you're transmitting sensitive information over SSL, if somebody cracks into breaks the SSL itself, then the data is revealed. Instead, if you do an extra encryption on the data and then send it on HTTPS, then even if HTTPS is breaking, your data is still secured. So in this way, there are some tips of how the sensitive data need to be protected about salting, hashing, and in case of HTTPS, one methodology is you should also try to ensure that HSTS header is ensured, so that the application will only work if HTTPS is there. If somebody is trying to perform a downgrading kind of an activity, then HSTS will stop the attacks. So like this, there are certain mitigations for sensitive data to be stopped from exposure. Similarly, XML external entity, this is an attack related to the application, which is possible on applications which accept XML as the user input. So where do you see XML based user inputs? Generally, we see XML user inputs in the APIs, in the web service calls. Because most of the APIs, either they use SOAP based communication, they use JSON communication or XML communications. So whichever API is using an XML XML as the input data, there is a possibility of XML external entity injection. So this brief background about this background about the web services. I'll just demonstrate you the attack. Now, as you see in XML based things, there is one important thing called as DTD, document type definition. Most of the users, they don't need a DTD. People generally start XML content directly as an injection. So, as a data. Now, as you can see here in the screenshots given, right side, doc type note, this less than symbol, exclamatory doc type is there, right? This is how the DTD language starts upon in XML. So DTD defines certain parameters for any particular XML. What are the variables? What are the titles? These kind of things. In the bottom box also, you can see how doc types are used in XML. This is the genuine way of using the doc type. But this same logic is used by attackers to perform XXC attacks on the systems. How? It is something like this. As you can see here in the top right, you just go one by one, though I have shown everything. First, see the topmost left block, where a post request is going on post process.php, and there is an XML input going in over here. Right? You can see here XML version, root, name, CDAC, telephone number, email, and password is there. When I send this request, the right side you can see, sorry, abcd@cdac.in is already registered. So this page is trying to send this XML data to perform some registration. An application is trying to validate and say this email is already registered. Now, when this kind of an XML input is going to server, what attackers can try is by inserting a DTD XML parameters into the XML data. So as you see here in the bottom left third block, in the XML, above the root, it's been added some doc type test entity XXC system file etc password. So this is a system level file accessing method to access the content. Now this is been sent, then immediately server have responded, first line remains same, sorry so and so user doesn't exist. However, there is a etc password file content, complete content being pasted over here, because the server is not validating whether the XML data, whatever request is coming is can be processed by, needed to be processed or not. It is just executing. Since file password is required, it is showing the file password. So here also validation is not done properly. So XML XXC attacks are very dangerous because they can not only show the files like this, they can even send communication from server to different internal servers. They can even create users. They can even create a DOS attacks on the systems. So XXC is also very dangerous. So if at all your application is having XML based content, definitely you have to think about whether application may be vulnerable to this kind of attacks. So the mitigation is, obviously the XML parsers should be good enough to identify the invalid contents. And there are many more mitigation steps over here, like server-side validations, filtering, sanitizations, and so on. So one has to implement all of them. So moving towards the next top 10, broken access control. Atul, I'll take another 10 minutes.
Sure.
Yeah, thank you. So broken access control, this is related to the similar session management, but the only difference over here is, as I was mentioning in some time back also, logged in user do not behave as per his role, never. He tries to tamper whatever he wants if he is not a genuine user. Even though genuine users still keep trying. For example, you see this example. This is a banking website and account is equal to 6065 is there. I've logged in, I'm trying to activate this. As soon as I see 6065, I change this 65 to 66 and see what happens. Unfortunately, if I see the information of a user whose account number is 6066, then he can definitely tamper and see every user's data. So this is called as a broken access control. So the way we were changing the URL, copy pasting URL and seeing the other users' content, by changing a simple ID parameter, get parameter or anything, this can be as part of get parameter, it can be as part of hidden field in many applications. There are different mechanisms. One can easily tamper this and look into the others' data. That's how the broken access control activity happens up. Attack happens. So one has to ensure that the user logged in, whether he is trying to see his relevant page only or not. That validation has to be done at each and every page. So this is another scenario of one we have seen just now. I'm using a user's content. By changing this word to user to admin or manager also, if I'm able to see others' contents, that is also a different technique. Wherein I don't need to change the parameter, but I'm changing the names, folder names or path names. These are different scenarios of how access control can be violated and misutilized by the users. So yes, the mitigation is again the same. One has to properly verify the session at each and every page along with their role. Proper course has to be implemented, cross-origin resource sharing techniques. One has to disable the web server directory listing kind of things and so many more. So these are some mitigations. Security misconfiguration is something related to reading about your web server hardening. So as you have seen just now, we saw 500 error. Similarly, many a times you might come across the default web server error, default web server login pages, web server manager pages, what you have seen the screenshots over here. So these are all the default pages of the servers, web servers. One has to make sure that these are being removed so that no sensitive information gets leaked out through these kind of attacks. So that can be done by doing certain, these are some examples of Apache configurations. By following these configurations, you can harden your Apache web server. Similarly, every web server have their own hardening techniques. You have to ensure that you perform proper strong hardening on the web server so that web server related sensitive data do not get revealed to public unnecessarily, because they reveal a lot of sensitive information. Then moving towards cross-site scripting, this is related to the similar to injection, but instead of the database, we are trying to target a user at his browser itself. Cross-site scripting. So we try to insert the scripting languages in the browser, JavaScript program, try to steal session IDs and so on using this vulnerability. And the mitigation for cross-site scripting vulnerability is we need to sometimes what happens is, even though we do validations, there may be a need, for example, to take up an address field or something. There may be a need that you need certain special characters. In some places, people use less than symbols also. Sometimes people use hashes in addresses. So address is one of the example field where any data you may require. Sometimes description. So in such scenarios, we are tended to accept anything that the user enters. In such scenarios, most accesses are possible. So what you can do is, there is a technique called as encoding, HTML encoding. So by doing that, the entered data would not get executed. Say for example, I want to accept less than symbol like this. So if I have to accept this and show to the user, what your program should do, it has to do HTML encoding. That's nothing but less than symbol should get replaced automatically with like this. Then I write script. Then I write GT semicolon. So when I convert my script, this kind of script, into the encoded format of this fashion, automatically this won't get executed in the browser, and thus the cross-site scripting kind of attacks won't be successful. This is called as an encoding technique, HTML encoding. So one has to practice this and ensure that this happens, so that there is a scenario that you have to accept everything, accepted content do not get executed on the user's browser by doing encoding, and thus you can stop the XSS based attacks at the users. Insecure deserialization, basically this is a very new concept and very technical concept. Refer them, but I would show you the impact of this. The way we have seen XXE, where you are able to see etc password file, this deserialization is also similar lines. Basically, in insecure deserialization also, users data is being sent from application either in the form of a post form or in the get parameter. There, instead of a regular data, users are trying to insert system level commands like this. As you see here, I'm not sure if it is very clear to you or not. We have tried to insert system uname -a. This is a Linux command to read the operating system's version. So you can see in the output in the right side, this is giving me the kernel version along with its operating system details. So system level commands can execute from the application. That is what is the impact over here. So insecure deserialization is again nowadays insecure deserialization happens where you may remember this, so that insecure deserialization is when user controllable data is deserialized by a website. So serialization and deserialization is done by most of the applications in today's world. Today's latest technologies are using this technique of serialization and deserialization in many cases. But only thing is, one should never do a deserialization on user controllable data. That is, any data that we are accepting from user, that data we should never perform deserialization, because performing a validation on a deserialization and deserialization context is very difficult. And so The logic of doing a deserialization on user controllable data itself, we should avoid in our application so that this vulnerability do not execute. If we are doing this, definitely application would be vulnerable to insecure deserialization. So we need to take care about that and do proper activity. So coding example is given here. Definitely you can look into them. Then the last but one is the using components. This is something about applications. Say for example, your website is developed in WordPress. Obviously, you will try to choose the latest version of WordPress stable version. But if you're using an older version, that means that you're using a component which is having a vulnerability. You already know that there is a vulnerability in that. Already WordPress 4 is vulnerable to so many attacks. So if today's date also you're using WordPress 4, so you're trying to put up a risk to the organization on your own. Anything, not only WordPress. I just gave an example because that's most known. If you're using Bootstrap older version, if you're using a JavaScript, which is a very old version, and there are known vulnerabilities in that. Old version need not be vulnerabilities always. Old known vulnerabilities are there means, and you're using that vulnerable application, then automatically the application will have the impact of facing so many attacks onto the systems. So we have to always ensure we use the latest stable versions wherever possible. And finally, monitoring, as I was referring to, this is a scenario where attacks happen. Post attack, nobody knows how the attack happened, when it happened, how did it happen, what data has come to the server for the attack to happen, and so on. So this is basically a practical oriented thing. So is your application vulnerable to this particular thing or not? This you will know if you have any of these things over here. If your application is logging auditable events, like say for example, which user logged in, at what time he logged in, how much time he was there in the system, and from which IP did he log in. This kind of a statistical information, whether your application is collecting and putting somewhere in the log file or database. If yes, then your application is not vulnerable. If no, then we can say that application is having insufficient logging and monitoring issue. Similarly, warning and error messages should be adequately logged. Any error that is getting generated by the web server, it should properly log in the server so that why error has generated, what kind of input has caused this error. Such information should be logged in the systems properly. So by doing much more points are also given. So by ensuring all of this data is properly logged on the web servers, then we can consider that our application is having sufficient logs so that tomorrow anything happens, we can diagnose or detect or analyze the problem, what happened or what caused the attack. Otherwise, it could lead to different activities. So these are some mitigation techniques, which in a way I have already explained them. So that covers the OWASP top 10. I'm sorry, in the last I had to hurry a little bit because of time, but still I've tried to put the most important points for you. And these are some references. Anybody interested? Cheat sheets is for the developers. Anyone who is developer in the over here, they can definitely look into the cheat sheets because these are useful for, they have very good cheat sheets for every programming language that you know, and techniques of how to mitigate each of these vulnerabilities in that specific programming language. Testing guide is something which you can use to learn how to test or identify these vulnerabilities. So with this, I conclude the session. If any questions are there, quickly we can take up. No questions? Okay. Great. Thank you. I hope this was beneficial to you. So please feel free to reach through email ic@cdac.in or through the group. Anyone can forward me the messages if something is there. Thank you so much. I think, Atul, there are no questions. You can carry
Yes,
on. Thank you.
thank you. Good afternoon, sir.
Hello.
Hello, sir. Good afternoon.
Yeah, good afternoon, Atul. I think am I audible, right? To you?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. You are audible, sir.
I'm just case we have a break or what? Shall I start?
Yeah, you should start, sir.
Okay, I'm just sharing my PPT. So hope you are able to see my screen, right?
Yes, sir.
Good evening, everybody. Today we'll be discussing about the hardening techniques of the systems, servers, and network devices, and how this network devices can be hardened, and basically how the